Chapter 1, The Garden Encounter. The high society of Köln was bedded in mystery and the languor of old royalties. When counts, princes, and princelings gathered, there were grand ballrooms alongside beautiful modern buildings, everything the late 19th century could offer to the wealthy. Yet Professor Newman had come here only after a long battle with lung disease. He had finally overcome it and was now considered cured. His breathing had improved dramatically during his final weeks at the sanatorium, and he could breathe normally again, his lips no longer blue with oxygen deprivation. He was preparing for his departure from Köln to Bucharest in a few months. Today he spent his afternoon in a beautiful public garden full of rose flowers and benches, with trees already green and full of the fresh air his lungs craved. He walked around the park, admiring the elegant ladies accompanied by their servants who tried to catch the attention of wealthy suitors. He waited on a bench, then took a book from his bag and began reading. Something interrupted him, a soft laugh, musical and enchanting. Someone was approaching, a young man of extraordinary beauty. He had red hair like burnished copper, fine as silk and catching the afternoon light. His clothes were fashioned from the finest materials, silk and velvet, along with the most exquisite black coat Professor Newman had ever seen. The young man was clearly in his 20s, youthful yet carrying himself with sophisticated grace. He was examining the flowers with delicate attention, and one might have questioned his gender at first glance. You wouldn't have known whether this beautiful creature was man or woman. His hair was longer than convention dictated for men, not as long as a peasant woman's, but uncommonly long nonetheless, tied in a ponytail with a silk ribbon. His eyes were the greenest emeralds, his features so refined they seemed carved by a master sculptor. He looked like a painting by one of the great masters, so sophisticated and elegant that Professor Newman found himself utterly fascinated. Setting aside his book, he approached this beautiful stranger. "Good day to you, sir," Professor Newman greeted him with genuine warmth. "Good day. You are not from Köln, are you? Your accent betrays you." "Ah yes, I'm from Bucharest." "Bucharest? I've heard it's a beautiful city, like a small palace built of dreams." "Indeed it is." The conversation flowed naturally, like water finding its course. Professor Newman discovered that the young man was Aubrey de Vere, a lord whose family owned textile factories nearby in the industrial districts. That explained his silk clothes and refined appearance. Despite his youth, Aubrey was remarkably well educated and sophisticated. He knew many languages, had read extensively, and had traveled around the world as if searching for something he could never quite find. Professor Newman was fascinated by his younger companion. They walked around the park together, and at the end of their discussion, Aubrey extended an invitation. "If you're available, there's a tea party at Mrs. von Richter's this evening. She lives at 28 Maximilianstrasse. Would you care to attend?" "I'll be there by 8, Professor Newman replied, surprised at his own eagerness. Professor Newman had never thought about attending such social gatherings, but the charm and mystery of his companion compelled him to do something he had never done in his life: attend a high society tea party. Chapter 2, The Tea Party and First Suspicions. The gathering was everything one might expect from Köln's high society. Everything was carefully and neatly arranged, the waiters were perfect in their timing and attire, and the atmosphere had the quality of a beautiful cliché, something too forcefully perfect to be entirely natural. When Aubrey de Vere appeared, he had changed his attire. Gone was the black coat, replaced by a green one of equal elegance. He had exchanged his silk shirt for a cotton one of the finest quality, along with perfectly tailored pants that were perhaps slightly loose but created a pleasing effect. He wore a hat but kept his hair tied back, though this time it was braided in an intricate pattern that made him look like a figure from a Renaissance painting. Something made Professor Newman question his perceptions. Aubrey had painted his lips with a subtle touch of red, not the sophisticated rouge that women used, but something more natural, more androgynous. "Professor Newman, you finally arrived." Aubrey greeted him warmly. "Come, let me introduce you." He was introduced to an elderly lady, the Countess von Liechtenstein. The lady was in her 70s, well-educated and part of England's intellectual society. She had been educated at the best universities that accepted women and had even functioned as a woman doctor, a rarity in those times. She knew many languages, including Greek and Latin. The conversation ranged from literature to philosophy, but Professor Newman found himself watching Aubrey throughout the evening. The young lord would disappear and reappear, moving through the gathering like a graceful specter. Perhaps it was the wine, perhaps his age, but Professor Newman found his memory growing hazy about certain details of the evening. This became a regular pattern. Professor Newman attended several such gatherings, always in Aubrey's company, always observing the young man's mysterious comings and goings. Chapter 3: The Mysterious Woman. One evening, Professor Newman attended a tea party organized by the Countess von Liechtenstein, but Aubrey was notably absent. He wondered if the young lord had embarked on another adventure. Such absences were not uncommon among young aristocrats. But something troubled him. Aubrey's name had been on the guest list, and he had accepted the invitation. Why wouldn't he attend? At the end of the evening, Professor Newman found himself walking home alone through the labyrinthine streets of Köln. On a quiet side street, he saw a beautiful woman walking ahead of him. She wore a dark blue dress, elegant but somehow familiar. Her figure was slender, almost boyish, and her hair was arranged in a style that reminded him strongly of Aubrey. He met her eyes for a moment, those same green emeralds, before she covered her face with a fan and continued walking. Most remarkably, she wore the same distinctive bracelet that Aubrey always wore, an intricate piece of silver and jade that he had claimed was a family heirloom. Professor Newman quickened his pace, but when he reached the spot where she had been, the woman had vanished into the night like a ghost. Chapter 4: The Asylum. Days and weeks passed without word from Aubrey. Professor Newman tried to dismiss his concerns, telling himself the young lord had simply embarked on one of his travels and would return in a few months. He was preparing to leave Köln when he received an unexpected telephone call. Professor Newman? Yes, this is he. This is a servant from the von Richter household. I'm calling about Lord Aubrey de Vere. He has been admitted to the municipal asylum. The news came like a thunderbolt. Professor Newman immediately cancelled his departure plans, dressed hurriedly, and took a carriage to the asylum. He found Aubrey in a small, sterile room, lying in bed in what appeared to be a nightmarish, feverish state. The young man was trembling beneath soft blankets, humming to himself in a way that sent chills down Professor Newman's spine. His temperature was so high that even the cold November air from outside couldn't cool him. Professor Newman went to the hallway to find a doctor. I'm here to visit Aubrey de Vere. He appears to be in great distress. Yes, we know. Lord de Vere has neurosis and is in a rather delicate state. He also has a severe cold. Let me fetch another blanket for him. Thank you for your kindness. Returning to Aubrey's room with the additional blanket, Professor Newman found him trembling even more violently. As he began to cover him, Aubrey suddenly awakened. No. Aubrey cried out. No, I won't go. Leave me alone. It was as if he was trapped in a nightmare. Professor Newman considered waking him fully, but when Aubrey's eyes opened wide, his breathing became shallow and rapid. He was screaming but covering his mouth with his own hands, as if trying to silence himself. Professor Newman felt tremendous pity for the young man's suffering. He sat on the edge of the bed and gently embraced him, telling him to try to wake up because everything was just a dream. Gradually, Aubrey's breathing calmed. Professor Newman questioned him gently, "Do you feel all right? Should I call anyone?" "No, I don't want to see anyone." "What happened, Aubrey?" "It's a long story. Someone followed me after one of the parties. They wanted to steal my bracelet and the jewelry I was carrying." "And what happened then?" Aubrey's breathing began to quicken again. He threw me in the river." "He threw you in the river?" "Yes." Aubrey's breath started to shift from calm to agitated, becoming shallow again. "I don't remember much more." "It's all right, you don't have to remember everything now." Soon Aubrey fell into what appeared to be a dreamless sleep, though his body remained tense with anxiety. Professor Newman left but not without speaking to the attending physician. "Doctor, what exactly happened to him?" "Actually, we're not entirely certain. He was robbed several weeks ago and came to us in a very bad state. He's improving now, but everything was so confused that the police couldn't determine exactly what occurred. He was found on the riverbank by some fishermen. It might be simple hysteria, but he's young and should recover fully." Chapter 5: The Brothers Visit. Professor Newman returned the next day to find Aubrey in better condition, no longer trembling, though still fragile. During his visit, Aubrey's brother arrived, a stern, imposing man named Lord Edmund de Vere. "Professor Newman, I presume? I understand you've been visiting my brother." "Yes, I've been concerned about his welfare." Edmund's expression was cold, calculating. "I believe he was robbed near the riverbank and thrown into the water. Poor Aubrey has always been delicate. He walks dangerous paths, if you understand my meaning. We'll need to take better care of him in the future." Something in Edmund's tone made Professor Newman feel uneasy, as if there was a knot forming in his throat. Everything about this situation felt wrong, though he couldn't articulate why. Chapter 6: Revelations. Over the following weeks, as Aubrey recovered, Professor Newman visited regularly. Gradually, the young man began to trust him enough to reveal the truth about his situation. "My brother discovered my secret," Aubrey confessed during one of their walks in the asylum's garden. "I have a particular inclination. Sometimes I dress as a woman. It brings me peace, allows me to feel like my true self." Professor Newman listened without judgment, his heart aching for the young man's pain. "Edmund and my other brother, Charles, they threatened to expose me to society, to ruin me completely. The night I was attacked, I had been walking dressed as a woman. Someone did try to rob me, but I suspect my brothers arranged it, hoping to teach me a lesson or perhaps hoping I would be eliminated." "Aubrey, you can't stay here. This isn't healing you, it's destroying you." "Where would I go? My family controls my inheritance, my reputation. I'm trapped." Professor Newman made a decision that would change both their lives. "Come with me to Bucharest. I have a position at the university there. You could start fresh, away from your brother's influence." Chapter 8: New Beginnings in Bucharest. Bucharest welcomed them like a warm embrace. Professor Newman had arranged for Aubrey to stay in a small apartment near the university while he recovered. The young man began to bloom in this environment of acceptance and freedom. Professor Newman introduced Aubrey to his intellectual circle, where the young man's education and refinement were appreciated. Slowly, Aubrey began to trust again, to believe in the possibility of happiness. It was during this period of recovery that fate intervened in the form of Alexandru Dumitrescu, one of Professor Newman's most brilliant students. Chapter 9: Alexandru. Alexandru was studying literature and philosophy under Professor Newman's guidance. He was tall and dark-haired, with intelligent brown eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put others at ease. When Professor Newman introduced him to Aubrey, there was an instant connection, intellectual at first, but gradually growing into something deeper. Alexandru was fascinated by Aubrey's knowledge of languages and literature, his experiences traveling throughout Europe, and his refined aesthetic sense. Unlike most men of their time, Alexandru seemed genuinely curious about Aubrey's perspective on art, beauty, and identity without passing judgment. "You see things differently than most people," Alexandru observed during one of their long conversations in a Bucharest café. "Your eye for beauty, for the subtle details that others miss, it's remarkable." Aubrey felt his heart flutter. Never before had anyone appreciated these aspects of his personality without trying to change or suppress them. Chapter 10: Love Blooms. As spring arrived in Bucharest, so did love. Alexandru and Aubrey began spending increasing amounts of time together, exploring the city's museums, attending concerts, and engaging in deep philosophical discussions that lasted late into the night. Professor Newman watched this development with mixed feelings, joy at seeing Aubrey happy, but concern about the risks such a relationship might pose in their conservative society. One evening, as they walked along the Dambovita River, Alexandru took Aubrey's hand. "I've never felt this way about anyone before," Alexandru confessed. "I don't fully understand what I'm feeling, but I know I don't want to be apart from you." Aubrey's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought I could be loved for who I truly am." "You are loved, completely and without reservation." They kissed then, gently, under the stars reflected in the river water, and Aubrey felt as if his soul was finally coming home. Chapter 11, The Secret Garden. Professor Newman, observing the growing bond between his student and Aubrey, made a generous gesture. He owned a small house with a beautiful garden on the outskirts of Bucharest, which he offered to the couple as a private retreat. "You both deserve a place where you can be yourselves without fear," he told them. "Consider this your sanctuary." The house became their secret garden, a place where Aubrey could dress as he pleased, where Alexandru could write poetry inspired by his beloved, and where they could simply exist as themselves without the weight of societal expectations. Aubrey began to cultivate an actual garden, finding peace in nurturing growing things. Alexandru would often write while watching Aubrey tend to the flowers, inspired by the grace and beauty he saw in his lover's movements. Chapter 12, Letters from Köln. Their peace was interrupted by letters from Köln. Aubrey de Vere had somehow discovered Aubrey's location and was demanding his immediate return to Germany. "He threatens to expose me if I don't come back," Aubrey said, his hands shaking as he held the letter. "He says he'll ruin Professor Newman's reputation as well for harboring a degenerate." Alexandru's jaw tightened with anger. "We won't let him destroy what we've built here." Professor Newman, when informed of the situation, was surprisingly calm. "I have some influence of my own, and more importantly, we have the truth. Edmund's threats are based on shame and prejudice. Here in Bucharest, we have allies who value education and human dignity over narrow-minded prejudice." Chapter 13, Standing Strong. Instead of cowering before Edmund's threats, they decided to face them head-on. Professor Newman reached out to his academic network, including colleagues in Germany who were sympathetic to progressive ideas about human nature and individual freedom. Meanwhile, Alexandru proved his devotion by publicly defending their relationship within their circle of friends and colleagues. His courage inspired others to speak out against the kind of persecution that Aubrey had suffered. "Love is love," Alexandru declared at a gathering of intellectuals and artists. "The capacity for deep feeling, for loyalty, for devotion, these are virtues regardless of their form. Anyone who would deny another person the right to love and be loved is the true pervert of nature." The speech was met with applause, and Aubrey felt a surge of pride and gratitude for this brave young man who loved him. Chapter 14, The Garden Party. To celebrate their victory over fear and to demonstrate their community's support, their friends organized a garden party at the secret house. It was attended by professors, writers, artists, and other free-thinking individuals who had come to know and respect both Aubrey and Alexandru. For the first time in his life, Aubrey attended a social gathering where he could be completely himself. He wore a beautiful dress that he had sewn himself, deep blue silk that brought out his green eyes, and everyone complimented him on his elegance and grace. "You look radiant," Professor Newman told him. "This is how you were meant to be, free and happy." Alexandru couldn't take his eyes off his beloved. "You're the most beautiful person I've ever known, inside and out." Chapter 16, Building a Life. Over the following years, they built a life together that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Alexandru completed his studies and began working as a translator and writer, while Aubrey established himself as a tutor in languages and literature for the children of Bucharest's progressive families. They maintained the secret garden as their retreat but also found acceptance within Bucharest's artistic and intellectual community. Professor Newman remained a close friend and father figure, delighting in their happiness. Aubrey's brothers eventually ceased their threats, perhaps realizing that their power over him had ended. Aubrey occasionally received news from Köln through mutual acquaintances, but that part of his life felt like a story from someone else's existence. Chapter 17, Teaching and Learning. Aubrey discovered a natural talent for teaching, particularly with young people who felt different or misunderstood. His gentle manner and own experience of struggling with identity made him an ideal mentor for those who didn't fit conventional molds. One of his students was a young girl named Maria, the daughter of a liberal professor, who was more interested in mathematics and science than in embroidery and dancing. Aubrey encouraged her intellectual pursuits and helped her gain admission to advanced courses typically reserved for boys. "You reminded me that everyone deserves to follow their true nature," Maria told him years later when she became one of Romania's first female physicians. "You saved my life by showing me that being different isn't being wrong." Chapter 18, The Return of the Past. Their peaceful existence was briefly threatened when Aubrey de Vere arrived unexpectedly in Bucharest, apparently on business but clearly intent on causing trouble for his brother. The confrontation took place in Professor Newman's office, with Alexandru present for support. "Aubrey, you've disgraced our family name long enough," Edmund declared. "It's time to return home and accept your responsibilities." "My only responsibility is to myself and to those I love," Aubrey replied with a strength that surprised everyone, including himself. "I found happiness here, something I never knew in Köln." "Happiness? You call this perversion happiness?" Alexandru stepped forward. "Sir, your brother is one of the most educated, kindest, and most valuable members of our community. If you cannot see his worth, that reflects poorly on you, not on him." Professor Newman added his voice. "Aubrey has found his place in the world. He contributes to society, he harms no one, and he has earned the respect of all who know him. I suggest you examine your own character before criticizing his." Faced with this united front, Edmund retreated, but not without a final threat: "This isn't over." Chapter 19, Community and Acceptance. The encounter with Edmund served to strengthen their resolve and their community's support. Word spread through Bucharest's intellectual circles about the confrontation, and many people came forward to express their solidarity with Aubrey and Alexandru. A group of progressive citizens even organized a petition supporting their right to live freely and without harassment. The document was signed by professors, writers, doctors, and other respected members of society. "We have found our tribe," Alexandru observed as they read through the list of supporters. "These are people who value human dignity over narrow prejudice." Aubrey felt overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. "I never imagined such acceptance was possible. In Köln, I lived in constant fear. Here, I found not just love, but a whole community that sees me as I truly am."